Welcome to my office. It's a closet more, but it's got a desk in it, so it's an office now. I am Claire, or the Gentleman Scholar, and I'm gonna start putting all of my pontifications onto YouTube. Welcome to that trash can fire. Here's the first one. I originally did this as a school project for a class called Media, Arts, and Society. I think that's what it was called. It's the final project. It's the culmination of the whole course. So this is a in-depth critical analysis of something. For me, I picked a TikTok series, a fictional TikTok series by @GlamourPossum. Also, her actual name is Lauren Carter Reilly. And I decided to do a Feminist analysis of it, which is like maybe an unnecessarily deep analysis of TikTok, but I genuinely believe that all forms of media are worthy of good faith critique and actual analysis, and also I really like it and it's pretty and I want more people to see it. So there's that. I'm gonna get into it now. I'm just gonna get into the project. Yeah, that's the plan. So the piece of media is called The Wonderful Lady Bee. It was posted on TikTok in the summer of 2020 by Lauren Carter Reilly. My thesis statement, my point is that I think that this TikTok series is actually a reinvention of the revenge horror genre because it focuses on a story of reclamation and healing instead of just pure violent revenge. Revenge horror is a subgenre of horror. It tends to go like this. Woman is violently crimed. Woman survives violent crime. Woman then goes on to attack either the perpetrators or surrogates for those perpetrators. Famous examples are movies like Jennifer's Body, I Spit on Your Grave, Carrie, and I would argue that Kill Bill fits into this as well. Earlier I said that I was going to be analyzing this through the lens of cinefeminism. Now, it's a big word. It's a big media word. But basically, cinefeminism was coined in the 70s by some feminist film analysts. And the way that I think it's easiest to think about this is that cinefeminism is three lenses stacked on top of each other. Like those glasses that turn into sunglasses. So the three lenses are feminism, psychoanalysis, and classical film analysis. So, the way cinefeminism actually ends up working is that you use psychoanalysis and classical film analysis to look at the things that are happening on screen, and then you see how that interacts with a dominant social order, which in this case is patriarchy. Cine-feminism. Within that, we have to talk a little bit about classical film analysis. Classical film analysis is a lot about where's the camera pointing? Who are we looking at? What are we looking at? What's the lighting? Is the camera tilted? Da-da-da-da-da. There's tons of other video essays on YouTube that employ classical film analysis. And then psychoanalysis is based on the work of Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. I don't know how to say that man's last name. Which investigates a person's behavior based on their subconscious. For this in particular, we're going to talk about the castration complex, which is specific to Freud and got built on a little bit, but specifically Freud's castration complex and how it fits into slasher films. So there's one big critique of psychoanalysis, and that is it leaves no room for individuals whose gender identity doesn't align with their biological sex markers. So for the rest of this video, when I say man or I say woman, I mean a cis man and a cis woman. After this video ends, stop thinking that that's what I mean. Thank you. The Wonderful Lady Bee was a TikTok series, came out in the summer of 2020. It was made by Lauren Carter Reilly, and only Lauren Carter Reilly. That's important, because we're using the lens of feminism. As far as I know, Lauren Carter Reilly is a cis woman. Don't know her personally, so that's an assumption. Do with that what you will. The series, specifically, follows a character named Barbara Bixby, or Lady B, as she reaches out to her family members to discuss the nature of her through letters, and we slowly learn more about her background and how she became a immortal human-eating creature. It's very fun. I would like to have a caveat that when I did this project, I focused on season 1 because season 2 was not out yet, but now season 2 is out, and it doesn't actually change any of my points, but it's just out now, so there's just more content about it. So by the end of season 1, what we know about Barbara Bixby / Lady B is that she has been immortal for about 200 years. She has to eat people to stay alive, and that she has had 5 husbands through which she amassed a fortune. Those are the important things to focus on for my project. If you want to watch it and do your own close reading, you can focus on whatever you want. This is a part where I'm going to put in a clip, maybe.
I care not for the tearing of flesh, nor the gnashing of teeth. I've since matured. I do admit I indulge occasionally, but my palate has become complex, my tastes are rather decadent, and living in immortal circles will introduce you to a variety of international, delightful flavours. All uniquely charming. Having not been a very religious person when I was alive, I'm not partial to the words succubus, siren, perhaps, wild woman, or banshee. Maenad is another one. I do quite enjoy Maenad. I follow no gods and I serve no demons, although I have enjoyed the company of both. But this bloodlust, my tether to this realm, is all because of man's greed, or specifically, woman's greed. I am a rather refined...
We'll be talking about the gaze. So the gaze is a concept from classical film analysis. And the idea is that where people, like characters, are looking conveys a desire of those two characters, and where a camera is looking is what the audience is being invited to see. That one's kind of obvious. So, where characters looking shows desire. Historically, female characters, or women, have been excluded from this. They don't really get to look at things in desire. Oftentimes, they're on screen to be looked at. And sometimes they get to look at a monster in disgust. That's particularly in horror film. So, specifically, how this relates to the series. I'm going to put a clip here, maybe, of the murder scene.
Eleanor said, "If you play it right, Mercury will appear. And if you win the game, he grants you a wish." I said I would play, but not for too long. It was getting dark and I needed to go home. "To win this game," Eleanor said, "you had to take a life. But keep your hands clean." I told her I wanted to go home. I didn't want to play anymore. When one is stabbed, the knife does not always pierce the skin. The pain happens regardless. Hector was the first to stab me. William did not want to, but he did as she said. They both always did as Eleanor said. Winner gets their wish, the others get their riches. And last place doesn't matter at all. Does it, Barbara? I do not know if Mercury ever came to Eleanor. I do not know if he granted her wish. But as I lay dying, I had a wish too. I wished to live. I did not know it would be forever.
We see a couple things that are pretty unique here. We see Barbara look directly into camera, which is unique in film, but not unique in social media. What this does, though, I think, is it breaks this like voyeuristic nature of film. A lot of time in film, the audience is just this fly on the wall that's just seeing everything happen, and no one seems aware that they're there, right? The characters are just existing, and the audience is just existing, and there's the fourth wall, is what that's called. But when Barbara looks directly, essentially makes eye contact with the viewer, I think that it's inviting the viewer to interact more personally with this character. The other thing that you notice, sorry, I gotta flip my notes around. The other thing that's happening is that the camera is never focused on the violence. And that's a big critique of revenge horror and slasher films in general, is that oftentimes the camera films the crimes, the murder, the violence, in a way that could be seen as titillating or could give the audience some sense of satisfaction. But in this case, the camera shifts and it focuses on Barbara's face as she experiences the violence and as she asks to live, which I think that directs the audience's attention towards the victim of the crime, not as a piece of meat getting stabbed, but as a person experiencing something, which is fairly unique, especially for slasher films. My next point is castration anxiety. So earlier I mentioned that we're going to talk about Freudian psychology and psychoanalysis, specifically Freud's castration complex. Now this is super complicated, and if you want to read all sorts of Freud, I love you. I've read some of it obviously, but it's a really nuanced thing. But essentially, Freud says that there are two reasons a man would be afraid, disgusted by, or hate a woman. And it's either because he views that woman as castrated or as a castrator. So, if you see the woman as castrated, the man sees the woman as lacking the phallus, which is a fancy academic word for dick. And then this man, this is part of the castration complex, a man is very attached, emotionally attached, also physically attached, but emotionally attached to the phallus as it's like a symbol of male power. And then seeing a woman lacking that makes the woman less worthy of love and respect, apparently. The other view, the woman as castrator, is that man sees that woman as having the power to either control or remove the phallus, again, the symbol of male power. Kind of reductive and weird, makes us wonder what Freud was worried about as a person. But how this works for Lady B. It's pretty unique that Lady B is shown as both a castrator and as castrated. Now, in slasher films, it's common that when women are getting literally penetrated with a phallic object, a knife, that is then being symbolically presented as castrated. They will literally end up with a bloody gash. It's a little on the nose. And then oftentimes, the woman as castrator is also in slasher films. Mostly you see this with the final girl, as she will then literally penetrate the murderer with a phallic object, thus rendering him symbolically castrated. Bloody gash. Those aren't normally the same character. But in The Wonderful Lady B, we see Barbara Bixby as both the castrated and the castrator. Now, we already saw the clip where she was the castrated. We saw her getting implied stabbed. There was blood. We know. As castrator, though, it's interesting because I think this is very unique. She had those 5 husbands. She amassed great wealth from those 5 husbands. That, I think, is a symbolic castration of those 5 men. She removed their social and economic power, not their sexual power, but that economic power, and she used it for her own gain. So I'm, in this case, using economic power as a stand-in for the phallus, which she then removed and controlled. I think it's a very unique method of castration, but we do see the same character as castrated and castrator. My final point has to do with Lady B as the succubus. In the series, Lady B never tells us what kind of supernatural creature she is. But I'm going to use the narrative folklore idea of the succubus to analyze her a little bit further. Background. The narrative of the succubus originally comes from Jewish folklore. It comes from the folklore of Lilith, who was the first wife of Adam. Here's how that story goes. Adam tries to have sex with Lilith. Lilith refuses. She then leaves the Garden of Eden, has sex with Gabriel, and creates the race of demons. A lot of folklorists then trace that story into several other stories, like the idea of a siren, the idea of a Maenad. Sometimes people connect it to the idea of banshees. Succubus are also often portrayed as misappropriating sex. That's what Lilith did. She didn't have sex with her husband. She had sex with someone else and created a race that was not pleasing to the man. In the 1600s, there was this idea that the succubus would come to a man in a wet dream so that he would ejaculate not into a woman and waste his sperm, or that the succubus would somehow steal that sperm and make more demons. But again, it's misappropriating reproduction. She's doing the sex, but she's not having the babies, which is the point of sex in a lot of religious circles. So, reading this, a succubus is a woman who has sex not for reproduction and not for a man's pleasure. How does this connect to Lady B? Well, it connects because we're going to use marriage as a stand-in for sex. In that case, Lady B uses marriage not for the purpose of procreation and pleasing her husband, but for the purpose of gaining more of her own personal power via taking their money. Again, we use it as a stand-in of power before, but semen and sperm are also seen as a stand-in for power, so she's still taking a man's power, but she's doing it for herself. Another thing, in the first little clippy clip that I showed you, Lady B is eating meat in a way that is very pleasing to her. She looks very fancy. She's doing something that she has to do, which is eating people in a way that she finds pleasurable. So, Lady B is a succubus, or a feminist reading of a succubus, specifically because she does things for her own pleasure and not for the pleasure of men. So, my final point. Actually, it's not a final point. It's just my conclusion. My conclusion. The Wonderful Lady B is a reinvention of the revenge horror genre because it tells a story of healing and reclamation, not just of abject violence. We see this because Barbara Brie tells us her story and directs our gaze to her pain, not to her predicament, not to her attackers, but to her personal experience. She lives for her own pleasure and not for the pleasure of men, which directly subverts the idea that horror films are made for the male gaze. She doesn't allow the violence enacted on her to keep her from enjoying her life. She eats humans in a way that she likes. She seeks justice on her own terms without perpetuating that violence by taking men's money. And she seeks healing through contacting her family rather than pure revenge. That connects to something I mentioned quickly before, which is that the whole series starts by her sending letters to her descendants to try and explain herself. That's that. If you want to tell me why I'm wrong in the comment section, go ahead. You don't have to. I don't know. I'm also going to have my bibliography in the comment section and a link to Lauren Carter Reilly's YouTube page and also her TikTok, so you can check these out. Think of this as a really long commercial for The Wonderful Lady B. Bye.